Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Kings, that is Melachim Aleph, chapter 19, Perek Yotes. This is Saul Weinreb, the host of this podcast. It's a pleasure to be here as we continue to study this work. Today we continue where we left off, which was at the end of the dramatic events that occurred on Har HaCarmel, on Mount Carmel, where Eliyahu proved the truth of God over the Avodah Zarah, over the idol Baal, and the people accepted God upon themselves, and Eliyahu triumphantly accompanied the king back to the king's palace. Immediately afterwards, Eliyahu is about to learn why what seemed to be a success was actually a failure, and how God is going to explain to Eliyahu where he went wrong and what the problem is. So God brought rain, but it wasn't in the way he wanted. God wanted Eliyahu to join Achav and bring him closer to God, and bring him and lead the people back to God. But instead, what Eliyahu did was perform a spectacle and kill all of the prophets of Baal in a very zealous and violent way. And immediately that drew a counter reaction. Because when someone acts in this way, what's going to happen, rather than convincing the people, rather than drawing them close with kind words, with helping the way Ovadyahu was doing, right? The counter reaction is immediate and swift. Vayaged Achav le'Izevel. Achav told Izebel, Jezebel, his wife, Eis kol asher asa Eliyahu, everything that Eliyahu had done. And of course, kol asher harag es kol hanaviim bechorev, the fact that he had killed all of the prophets of Baal. It says the prophets, but obviously it's referring to the prophets of Baal, by the sword. Immediately, Izebel's reaction was not to come back to God. This is not the way people are. Not to abandon Baal, despite the grand proof that had just occurred. Immediately, what does she do? Vatishlach Izebel malach el Eliyahu lemar. Izebel went and sent a messenger, and key in on this word here, malach. Malach is often translated as angel, but here clearly the word actually means messenger, okay? And you'll understand in a few verses from now why I'm making this point. So Izebel sent a malach, a messenger, El Eliyahu, to Eliyahu, Elijah Lamar, saying as follows: Ko ya'asun Elohim v'cho yosifun. So shall do the God. And remember, she purposely uses the word Elohim here because in her mind there's gods, right? And Elohim is not using the four-letter word that's usually associated with the true God, with the capital G. She says, so shall they do v'chol yosifun, and so shall they do even more. In other words, by the power of the gods, is like what she's saying. Ki cha'es machar, that by this time tomorrow, asim es nafshecha kenefesh achad mehem, I am going to make your life just like the lives of the prophets that you had killed. In other words, I am going to put you to death. So interestingly, and a lot of people point this out, that why didn't she have him killed right away? This is the queen. It's almost as if she's giving him a chance to escape. That's the sense that one gets. That maybe, and this is totally conjecture, but it just kind of fits, that in the back of her mind, she's afraid, of course, of the power of this mighty God who pulled off this mighty spectacle. On the other hand, she's not convinced enough to go and follow the one God. She's still a pagan, a polytheist to her core, and she still, believes in the power of all of these gods, and she therefore says to him, I will kill you, because she was enraged by how he had slaughtered all of the prophets that were loyal to her before. But she still gives him a little out, a little escape. So immediately, Eliyahu gets the message, Vayar vayokom vayelech el nafsho. He was afraid, and he gets up, and he goes to save his life. He flees in El Nafsho in order to save his life. Vayavo be'er sheva asher liYehuda. And logically, where his best place for escape would be to go to the southern kingdom of Judah, where presumably he would find peace and refuge. Vayanach et na'aro sham, and he left his young servant, the person who had been accompanying him, there. So one would imagine that Eliyahu can live peacefully in Yehuda. I mean, Yehuda was a natural enemy of the north, escaping the king of the north to the south, especially being that he is loyal to God, which is God who is being served in the land of Judah, in the temple in Jerusalem and so on. One would think he can find peace and refuge there. However, he doesn't stay among the people there, but rather, v'hu halach bamidbar derech yom. He, after leaving his assistant, he goes and wanders into the wilderness, a day's trip, a day-long trip into the wilderness. Now, if one is reminded here of Ovadiah's statement in the last chapter that we read together in the beginning of chapter 18, you're just going to disappear off in your spiritual land with your God somewhere. Who knows where you're going to go? Eliyahu seems to have this habit of going away from people and finding God in the wilderness, and which is a spiritual path, but it's not the spiritual path that God wants his prophets to go on. God wants his prophets to stay among the people so that they can bring them and teach them and bring them closer to God. Vayavo, and he came to a place in the desert, Vayeshev tachas rotem echad, and he settled down underneath some sort of a rotem, which is some kind of a bush or tree that has thick branches. Vayish'al et nafsho lamos, and he just wanted to die. He asked that I should just die because he had done everything he thought he could do. He brought punishment upon the people. He brought he brought the miracle, the sign that people needed. I can't help but emphasize, if you talk to people about God, one of the big questions people always constantly ask is, well, if God was here, why doesn't he show me a sign? If he showed me a sign, then I'll believe. Okay, well, Eliyahu did that. He showed them the sign. How come, people, if why is it that, I'm such a bad guy? I don't keep any of God's commandments, but I'm doing fine. I have a job. I'm doing fine. Well, I punished them. I brought hunger. And the people still didn't turn around. It's just nothing working. Eliyahu's, all of my signs, all of my fire and brimstone is taking me nowhere. So Vayomer, and he says, Rav atah Adonai kach nafshi. He said, it's enough. Now, God, just take my life. Ki lo tov anochi me'avosai. I am no better than any of the people that preceded me. I am no better than any of my predecessors. In other words, I'm just like anyone else. Just take my life. This is an incredible depression that he entered into, and Eliyahu still didn't get the message. And God is about to teach him the message. Vayishkav, so he lays down, Vayishan, and he falls asleep, Tachat rotem echad, underneath a certain tree. V'hinei ze malach nogea bo, and this angel, or this malach, this messenger, was touching him. It's very conspicuously using the same word that Izebel sent a malach to go and get Eliyahu, and transmit the message to Eliyahu that he was to be put to death. And now the same word being used, a malach touches him, vayomer lo, and says to him, kum echol, get up and eat. Now, this messenger, you almost get the sense that it's the same guy. Izebel presumably sent someone who knows how to do some tracking, who knows how to find Eliyahu. And now this malach is, now obviously I can't prove that, this is just, you get that feeling. But if it's not the same guy, you get the same idea. That a malach, a messenger, could be someone who is coming to deliver a message of doom, a message of destruction. And here you have a malach, a messenger, a person coming to deliver a message of peace, a message of encouragement. Vayabet, so he looks, and he sees at his head, ugas ritzafim b'tapachas mayim. If you recall, several chapters ago, we mentioned that God showed Eliyahu the importance of relying upon simple people. He needed to rely on the merchants when he was stuck by the spring all the way back. He needed to rely on an old widow, right? On the kindness of human beings. And that was part of the message that I've been emphasizing, that God is trying to teach Eliyahu. The way to get to people's hearts is through soft kindness, through simple acts of goodness, through helping someone when they're hungry. Now someone, and I'm deliberately not translating this as an angel, because I believe that the verse uses the word malach specifically twice in two different contexts, several verses apart, in order to emphasize that this is not an angel, but rather this is a human being who was walking by and saw a hungry man and tapped him on the shoulder and gave him some food. In order to emphasize to Eliyahu the importance of these kinds of acts of kindness that goes so much farther than bringing fire from the sky on the top of a mountain, or declaring years of famine and suffering, etc., and all the fire and brimstone that Eliyahu had attempted. So he saw there a ugas ritzafim, some kind of a cake that had been reis tzadi fei refers to some kind of a that's cooked on coals, baked on hot coals. Vitzapachat mayim, and a jug of water. Vayochal vayesh, and he ate the cake and he drank the water. Vayoshav, and then he went back vayishkav and lay down again, now with a full belly. Vayoshav malach Adonai shenis vayigabo, and the messenger of God came back again and touched him. Now it emphasizes that this malach is a messenger of God. Again, this is often translated in many of the translations as an angel, but I think specifically the first time he was mentioned, it just calls him a messenger. Now it is specifying, in other words, that you should know that this malach is just like the first malach, who was the malach that Izebel had sent, who was clearly a human being. The second malach was a person that was walking by. And now it's emphasizing that the lesson that we should learn, which is that this person, this messenger, even though he's just a person walking by, is in fact a messenger of God, right? Trying to teach Eliyahu a lesson. He might be a human being that's walking on 2 feet and with 2 arms, etc., but this is a messenger of God who comes back again, vayiga bo, and touches him, vayomer kum echol, and he says to him, no, get up again, eat again. Ki rav mimcha haderech, you've been traveling for a long way, it could also be translated ki rav mimcha, that the way is long and you'll need energy for the trip. Vayakom vayocha v'yishta, and he gets up and he eats and he drinks again. Vayelech b'koach achila ahi, and now because he had the second meal, he had plenty of food. He was able to walk with that strength. Arboim yom, for 40 days, arboim laila. Here you have a person for 40 days and 40 nights. He goes on a long trip, ad har ha'elim chorev, until he gets to the mountain of Chorev, which is, of course, another name for the mountain of Sinai. So he goes back to the place where the Jewish people gathered many years prior in order to receive the Torah. So it's a 40-day journey from the desert near Beersheba. He takes a 40-day trip by foot and reaches there. Now here you have a person who before was begging to die, was depressed, was dejected, was literally giving up on everything, but now that he received this help and this sustenance, he had the strength to get up and take such a long and arduous journey. Vayavo sham el ha'ma'ara, and he gets there to the cave. Now, when it ever points out the ma'ara, it makes one think of which cave. There's like something special about this cave, and of course, the commentaries associate this with the place where Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moses stood before God, with God on the top of Sinai, and God said, "I will place you b'nikrat hatzur, in a crack in a rock." The assumption is that this Ma'ara is that one. Regardless of whether it is that one or not, it's certainly the verse here is trying to give us that image of Eliyahu going back to Sinai, going back to the place where God gave the people the Torah. Now, obviously there's a huge amount of symbolism. Number one, Eliyahu went there, right? we're told all we for for all we know, it would seem that he went there on his own. Nobody told him what his destination was. At least we're not told anything about anyone telling him where to go. He went there presumably because he wanted to find God. He wanted to find the truth. And Eliyahu, true to his pattern, goes to mountaintops, goes to faraway places where he seeks solitude in nature, etc. So this was a logical place for him to go, hoping that there he will have some insight, maybe an encounter with God that will teach him what he's supposed to do. What did he do wrong? Eliyahu at this point has no idea. What could I possibly have done wrong? What mistake could I possibly have made? When he gets there, he rests there, and the word God spoke to him and said to him, what are you doing here, Eliyahu? So this further strengthens the point that I just made, that he was never told to come here. He went there because he was seeking an answer. He was seeking an answer, what did I do wrong? And let's see, will Eliyahu learn his lesson or not? Vayomer, Eliyahu immediately said, Kano kinesi l'Adonai Elohei Tzvaos. I was vengeful and zealous for the sake of God, the Lord of hosts. In other words, I acted with tremendous zeal and power and strength, and because I wanted to defend the honor of God. Ki azvu britcha b'nei Yisrael, because your people of Israel, they have abandoned your covenant. The covenant which was made right here. They destroyed the altars that were built for you. And they killed your prophets. It's so ironic because Eliyahu, had he stayed with Achav like he was supposed to originally and never wandered in the wilderness and stayed with Obadiah, who managed to save 100 of them, it's theoretically plausible that Eliyahu might have saved even more had he been there helping him. But now he's angry. They killed your Nevi'im, your prophets. Va'ivaser ani levadi, and I alone am left. Vayivakshu es nafshi lekachta, and now where am I? They're looking for me to kill me. So again, Eliyahu says, I am alone. Why is Eliyahu saying he's alone? We saw that there was Obadiah. We saw that Obadiah had at least 100 prophets of God. And we're going to see soon in upcoming chapters that there were several other prophets of God in the court of Achav. But in Eliyahu's mind, he's alone because he's the only one who's fighting the fight. All of them are almost maybe traitors in his eyes. They're still sitting in that house, that corrupt house of Achav. But he's the only one that's fighting the fight. So in Eliyahu's mind, he truly is alone. So now here's God's answer. In one of the most powerful prophecies in the entire Tanakh, which we're about to read, Vayomer, and he said, say, go out of the cave, and I want you to stand on this mountain before God. Vihine Adonai over. And certainly, when he went out, God was passing. So Eliyahu saw some sort of image or representation in his mind when he saw this vision of God passing. V'ruach gidolah v'chazak, and there was a great and strong and powerful wind, miforei karim, which was smashing mountains, u'mishaber slaim lifnei Adonai, and it was smashing huge rocks that were before God. So as God was coming, but before him there was this tornado, so to speak, this incredibly powerful wind that just smashed everything in its path. However, lo varuach Adonai, God was not in that powerful tornado, that powerful wind. God was not there. V'achar haruach, and then after the wind and the tornado came, rash, there was an earthquake, and the ground was shaking. However, lo varash Adonai, God was not in that earthquake. V'achar harash, and after the rash, there was Aish, there was a huge fire, a massive forest fire with raging flames. But lo va'esh Adonai, but God was not in the raging flames. V'achar ha'esh, and after the flames, kol demama daka, there was a soft, quiet sound. Vayihi kishma Eliyahu, and that is where God was, in the soft, quiet sound. Vayihi kishma Eliyahu, And it was when Eliyahu heard that sound, Vayolet panov ba'adarto, immediately he sensed that that's where God is, and he immediately wrapped his cloak around his face. Vayetzeh, and he went out, Vayamod pesach ha'ma'ara, and he stood at the entrance of the cave. Vihine elav kol, and there was a voice speaking to him. Vayomer, and the voice said, Malachafo Eliyahu, what are you doing here, Eliyahu? Now this is the point where Eliyahu should have gotten the message. And at this point, Eliyahu should have understood what his job was to be. And I want to read to you the words of the Malbim. The Malbim was one of the famous commentaries, and he writes so beautifully here that I'm going to read to you. I'll read the English translation. This translation was done by Alex Israel in his Maggid Studies in Tanakh book on Kings 1. But so I just wanted to make sure to give credit where credit is due. But you can read the Malbim in the original Hebrew for sure. So God had showed him that God is to be found not in the wind, earthquake, and fire, but only in the voice of silence. And from this, his messengers should learn the lesson, not to make a loud noise or burn like fire, as did Elijah in his zeal for God, in his cessation of the rain, and in his execution of the prophets of Baal. Rather, God sends his messengers to approach the people with a quiet voice, to persuade the nation with bonds of love and gentle words. These are the messages God has been trying over and over and over again to teach Eliyahu. Will Eliyahu get this message? So God asks, as I just read back to the verses, Malachafo Eliyahu, what are you doing here? Eliyahu again still doesn't get it. Vayomer, and he answers almost verbatim what he said before he saw that vision. Kano kinesi ladonai Elohei tzavaos. I am overcome with vengeance and zeal for God, the Lord of hosts. Ki azvu brischa b'nei Yisrael, because the people of Israel, they abandoned your covenant. Es mizbechosecha harasu, they destroyed your altars. V'es neviecha hargu v'charev, and your prophets they killed by the sword. V'yivaser ani levadi, and I am here alone. V'yivakshu et nafshi lekachta, and all I am is running for my life because they're searching for me to kill me. Eliyahu again doesn't get the message, doesn't understand, doesn't get it. Is it because he doesn't get the message, or is it because in his nature he's the kind of person who simply, that is how he feels he has to deal with God? Some people are just that way. But regardless of what it is, despite seeing the message that God was trying to instruct him, why the mistakes you've been making all along, he still doesn't get it. Even here, even being shown this vision, this incredible vision at this point. At this point, God realizes, so to speak, to the extent that God realizes things, that Eliyahu is the wrong man for the job. So God gives him a few jobs, right? And just a quick, I want to say that at this point, God is going to, you give him just a few more things to do, and he's going to take Eliyahu away as the prophet and have him hire someone else instead. In the words of the Malbim again, when in a few verses from now, I'm going to read where God takes Eliyahu, takes him away from his position as prophet and has him handed over to the one who was to succeed him, Elisha. God says that, Malbim explains that because he expressed his desire not to return to prophecy, right, he commanded him to anoint Elisha. Because he repeated that he could not abandon the way of zeal for God. He was zealous for God's name, right? In other words, when God was asking him, what are you doing here, Elijah? The words of the Malbim, why, he explains it the way I explained it to you. Why do you not return to your prophetic mission in guiding the nation without zeal and turbulence? In other words, why did you come back to the cave? Get the message and go back and get rid of this zeal and vengeance, right? But no, he couldn't do it, and therefore God had to take Eliyahu away from his position. What jobs? Couple ending jobs here that Eliyahu is going to be given. Vayomer Adonai Elav, God said to him, Lech shuv l'darkecha midbara Damasek. Go back on your path and travel through the wilderness. In other words, you know what? You don't get it, so just stick around in the wilderness. Travel towards Damascus. And when you get there, I want you to anoint and appoint Chazael as king over Aram. Aram is one of the northern kingdom, especially biggest enemies, and I want you to anoint Chazael as king. We'll see later as this plays out that Eliyahu never actually fulfills this mission, but it's done by his student Elisha. And Chazael is going to be one of the seeds of destruction. And what God is saying over here, really, it's interesting, is he's saying to Eliyahu that destruction of the northern kingdom, those things happen. But they don't happen because you, as the prophet, declare a rav, declare a hunger, declare a famine. They happen because it's the natural consequence of what happens, and that's the way God runs his world. Punishment will come. You don't need to have the zeal. You're supposed to stay there and teach them the right path. But now, go ahead and anoint Chazael, because as we'll see later, as we study together in future chapters, that Chazael will eventually be the downfall of the northern kingdom, and will be an instrument of punishment for the people that had abandoned God. Ves Yehu ben Nimshi, and Yehu the son of Nimshi, Timshach l'melech al Yisrael. I want you to anoint him as king over the people of Israel. In other words, the northern kingdom. Which also Eliyahu is not going to actually do, and Yehu ben Nimshi is going to be the downfall of Achav, of the house of Achav. He's going to end up taking over as he's going to overthrow the house of Ahab when he kills Ahab's son, and he's going to eventually take over the northern kingdom. In other words, punishment will come to the people for abandoning God. Punishment will come to the kings, but it will not be through you, but it will be through the external other messengers that happen through their natural consequences. But that's not the job of the prophet. That Elisha ben Shaphat, and here's the main point here, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat, may Avel Mechola, who lives in a place called Avel Mechola, Timshach lenavi tachtacha. He you shall anoint as the prophet instead of you. In other words, you're done. You haven't fulfilled your mission. V'haya hanimlot mecherev Chazael yamis Yehu. And what's going to happen in the end, the punishment will come, because whoever gets saved by the sword, saved from the sword of Chazael, when Chazael comes with the Aramean army and destroys the northern kingdom, those that save Yamis Yehu will end up dying at the hands of Yehu as he attacks and takes over the northern kingdom. V'hanimlat mecher of Yehu. And those that die from that are saved from the sword of Yehu, Yamis Elisha, will end up dying at the hands of Elisha, meaning the people that protested. We'll see in Elisha's story that those that protested his prophecies of God ended up suffering a bad fate. Vihish RTV, we'll get to that later. In several chapters from now. Israel Shivas Alafim, and only 7,000 people of Israel will be left. Kol Habirkayim Asher Lo Karu LaBaal. The ones that will be left will be the ones that did not bow to Baal. B'chol Hapeh Asher Lo Nashaklo, and every mouth that did not kiss Baal. So in other words, I will take care of justice. That's not your job. This is so important. It is not your job to be the one who decides how people suffer, when people suffer, who gets punished. Your job is not to mete out justice. That's my job, God says, and that will happen. So you don't need to have zeal for me and to kill people for me. I can take care of that myself, right? Your job is to bring the people closer to me, the kol dumamadaka. Vayelech misham. So what did he do? He went from there, and Vayimsa at Elisha ben Shaphat, and he found Elisha the son of Shaphat. And where did he find Elisha? V'hu choresh, he was plowing Shnei Masar tzmadim lefanav, with 12 teams of oxen before him. V'hu b'shneim ha'asar, and he was with the 12th. You get the sense of Elisha working with other people working everyone with a team of oxen, working his field as a farmer. A very different image that one gets when one thinks about Eliyahu and the image of the ascetic, the holy man on the mountain. Vayavar Eliyahu Elav, and Eliyahu passed over to him. Vayashlich hadarto Elav, and he put his cloak over Elisha. And what did Elisha react? He said, Vayazov et habakar, when he gets this honor from the prophet, he leaves his cattle, Vayaretz acharei Eliyahu, and he runs after Eliyahu. Vayomer, and he says to Eliyahu, wait, I'm not ready to go with you yet to be a student and a prophet. Eshka nala aviu limi, I want to go and kiss my father and my mother goodbye. V'yelcha acharecha, and then I can go and be your student and take over, and learn to be a prophet. Vayomer lo lech shuv ki me asisi lach. Go ahead, sure, go back, because what have I done to you? In other words, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to give you this mission and to teach you on your way of being a prophet. So, of course, you have this image of a man who loves his family, who works with his colleagues in the field. Vayashav me'acharav, and he left Eliyahu. He turned back to go back to his family. Vayikach etzemet habakar, and he took the group of oxen that he was using to plow before, vayizbacheu, and he slaughtered them, uvechli habakar bishlam habasar, and he used the wood in order to cook the meat. Vayitein la'am vayochelu, and he made a big feast for everyone, and they all ate. So a person who loves his family, who wants to say goodbye to his parents, a person who makes a feast for all of his friends, right? And then after that, after saying a proper goodbye, he went after Eliyahu, vayisharseu, and he served Eliyahu to learn from him about God in order to be able to take on his new mission. This concludes the chapter 19, and from here we see Eliyahu just simply not getting the message. Eliyahu needed to step down, and we see his student by his side, Elisha, who we are going to learn a lot about his career as it goes on. And as we hit chapter 20, we're going to leave Eliyahu aside for a little bit and focus on Achav and what happens in the court of Achav and his wars and battles, etc., which we will study together soon, God willing. Thank you so much for studying chapter 19 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 20 and the rest of this wonderful, incredible book together. Have a wonderful day.